Hello, everyone. If you haven't met me, I'm Tom Coffey, president of the Louisville Forum. Welcome to our December 2024 program. The Louisville Forum programs typically meet at noon on the second Wednesday of each month here at Vincenzo's Restaurant downtown. All are welcome. Founded in 1984, 40 years ago, the Louisville Forum is a nonpartisan public issues group. We have debates and discussions of contemporary and sometimes controversial public policy issues that affect the greater Louisville community. For more information on the Louisville Forum, our events, or to join and make a reservation, please visit louisvilleforum.org. Today's program, this one was easy to prepare for because we luckily, not to be cliche, but in our spirit of traditions here in the holidays, every year for the last 4 years in December, we have hosted members from Frankfurt, from our legislators from Frankfurt, to talk about the coming year's legislative agenda. This year is no different, and I know that everybody gets really excited about this event. So luckily, we have two speakers you were all familiar with. Actually, just in June, I saw Rebecca Fleischaker here when she came in. It was no disrespect to her, but she's the only one who didn't get invited back from our June downtown revitalization event. We have Jason Nemes. Jason is the Kentucky House of Representatives Majority Whip. He represents District 33 and has since January 2017. He went to Manual High School, where he played both baseball and football. He is a graduate of Western Kentucky University and got his law degree from the University of Louisville. Welcome, Representative Nemes.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. And David Yates. David Yates is the Kentucky Senate Minority Whip. He represents District 37 and has since January 2021. Prior to that, David was a member of the Louisville Metro Council from 2010 to 2020, where he served 2 terms as president. He is a graduate of the University of Louisville and got his law degree from Northern Kentucky University. Senator Yates, thank you for being here. Well, I know everyone's excited. I know there's going to be a lot of questions here today, and I know both Jason and David are not new to this, so I'm just going to open the mic to them to give some opening remarks and then take your questions. Thank you, everyone.
First of all, thank you for having me back. It's always a pleasure to sit amongst friends. This one should be, and just talk to Jason briefly about it, and hopefully kind of informal. We'll give a kind of an opening and hopefully take a lot of questions and field things that may be on your mind. This will be the short session coming up. We just passed a pretty intense budget in that cycle, so I think a lot of times in the short session is when we can actually work on some of the legislation that are important to us, some conversations, and then really talk about some of the, whether it's tax implications that we had before or some of the laws and things that we had passed previously, how that's going to impact us going forward. I think that's a lot of times to figure that out amongst us. I'm part of, in the legislature, which we call a super minority. We were joking around about our caucus retreat just recently, and it wasn't too hard to get reservations for somewhere for us to go and eat yesterday. But with that being small, I think also it's easier to kind of navigate and move. When I was president of the Metro Council, I was president of a supermajority, and I'll tell you that had its own problems and issues as well. Brandon shaking his head, yes, he remembers. So talking to, and I'll work across the aisle pretty well, even through the House and through the Senate, but a lot of times what you deal with in our politics, in Kentucky politics, and it should be, I think it's issue specific. Sometimes you'll have things that concentrate on rural and urban and things that matter. But it's about building consensus, and so I think that's really important, and thinking events like today are really important as we talk through issues, and I'm sure we can talk about a multitude. I think they gave me something really general, like issues heading into 2025, and I started printing stuff out. I was like, this is going to get crazy, because we really don't know what all we're going to tackle. Obviously, we have leadership coming in, but you're talking about 100 members of the House of Representatives, and then our members here in the Senate as well, who don't file as many bills, but we're going to go through. One of the big ones I think that we need to really hone down on is housing. We've been talking about it for years. Even back when I was local, we were saying in the event that we don't get a handle on this, this is going to dramatically affect our major cities and then outside in the rural areas, and you've seen it across Kentucky. And so when we talk about housing, the first thing that pops to mind is affordable housing. And affordable housing is very, very important. But in Kentucky, based on the task force that we've talked about, we need all housing. We need every bit. So what happens is, in the event that you don't have enough gap housing or middle class housing, you force your people who are lower income levels out down to the affordable housing. So I think you're going to see a lot of, and look at it, maybe some carrots, some incentives, some tax incentives for housing policies. Our task force, I thought we did a good job. We had a lot of discussion. A lot of it's information that most of us know and understand, but getting it out to the general public and my other colleagues and saying, yes, I think I can sign them to it this year. We may actually make some movement in regard to that. The other is going to be, what are you going to see with DEI this year? We have some new leadership in the Senate, and they've voiced that may be an issue. That is going to be one that's going to be for some long debate. I'm not going to try to rehash all that in my opening argument, but I think we have to be very, very careful. The president of the University of Louisville has done a really good job of articulating the importance of having some of these policies in place. As we're all lawyers up here, and we know some of the importance of when you're learning voir dire and those basic issues of having understanding. So I think that it's going to be really important this year to engage the community in our debates. A lot of times people tune out once we get sworn in and we're running into the session. You don't get quite as much coverage, I think, in Frankfort as I did on the local level. But we're passing things that are really affecting your daily lives that are so important. So I'm hoping to get the community engaged more this year and really lighting a fire under some of my colleagues. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Please,
All right.
Jason.
Well, thank you. First of all, I want to thank the Louisville Forum for hosting this. It's a wonderful event that we have that brings different people together from different perspectives and somewhat the same perspectives. Don't let David fool you. He's maybe the head of the minority, but he's extremely effective in Frankfort. He's he's somebody that we respect and like a lot. And he and I, it might be hard to get too nasty with one another because we've been friends since way before politics. So we'll try to throw some zingers, maybe make it a little more interesting. But David and I are good buddies, and we've been so for a long, long time. So I'll just get right into it. I think I'm going to say two things that I think are coming down on the Frankfort's agenda this year, and then I'll talk about one thing locally that has a multifaceted impact locally. And so the first thing is we're going to reduce taxes from 4% to 3.5% on your state income taxes. This is something that we ran on in 2016 when Republicans took control of the General Assembly of the House of Representatives. And it was 6% then, it's 4% now, it will be 3.5%. We'll vote the first thing we do is we will vote to knock it down to 3.5%. That's good for a lot of reasons. We want to make sure it's a long-term plan to growth. We're a poor state. We're not going to tax our way into prosperity, but it's a way that we can grow long-term. It's a conservative approach to a conservative goal. The rule is, just so you know, we've heard a lot about the Kansas effort where they reduced their taxes overnight. What we've decided to do is we reduce our taxes 0.5%, so 0.5%, when we can afford it. What does that mean? So when you reduce it 0.5%, that takes away about, these are estimates, it's a little bit more, it's like 630, but about $600 million out of the coffers. So what we've said is, conservative approach, once we have double that, so effectively $1.2 billion in unappropriated budget dollars, when we have that much money into the account that are unappropriated, then we will reduce the tax 0.5%. That's good because it makes sure that we don't starve government. We have serious issues we need to pay for, so we continue to pay for those kinds of things, while it also makes us very disciplined in our spending, because if you reduce taxes but you continue to spend like drunken sailors, that's the worst case scenario. Just look at Washington, D.C. For that. And I want to say a particular pitch on reduction of income taxes for Louisville. It helps Louisville more than anywhere. Why? Because we always say rightfully that we send too much money to Frankfort that we don't get back. We're about 18% of the population, about 24% of the revenues in Kentucky come from Louisville. We don't get nearly that amount back, and we shouldn't because we're wealthier than most. We have to make sure that we help our friends all over the Commonwealth with the necessary government that they have as well. But it keeps money in the pockets of Louisvillians spending in Louisville businesses. So I think it's a good thing for all of Kentucky, but the reduction of the state income tax is particularly good for Louisville. So the first thing is we're going to reduce taxes, and we're very proud of what we've been able to accomplish on the taxing and the spending front in the General Assembly. The second thing David alluded to, and that is housing. We have a looming housing crisis. I don't think it's a crisis yet, but it's getting close. We got a looming crisis that we have to address. This is not a issue that is unique to Louisville or unique to Kentucky. It's all over the country, but we have a pronounced one here. If you take the mayor's numbers, which I'll do for this purpose, he says we have a need for about 30,000 additional affordable housing units. I don't know exactly what an affordable housing unit is. It's something different to every single person that you talk to. It certainly means people at the low end who can't fend for themselves, no doubt about that. But it also, to me, my focus is it's for the housing for the mechanic, the nurse, the teacher who is busting their behinds. They're going to work every single day. They're making America work. They're the ones that are paying the lion's share of the taxes. But you guys know it because a lot of you have children, nephews and nieces, grandchildren. They can't afford to get in the market. They can't afford to buy a house the way people like me and older could. And so right now, what developers do, because they're capitalists, I have no beef with this. If they have an acre, they want to put apartments on it, or they want to put big houses on it. I have no problem with that. Government needs to understand that. How can we help them build more Lindens, Mike? Build more Valley Stations, build more Camp Taylors for people who are making America work, but they just can't get something that they own. We know that's important, right? Renters care about Louisville. They care about their community, no doubt about that. And if you want to rent your whole life, great, that's your choice. But we do know that when you stake a flag in the ground and you say, this is my piece of property, you care a little bit more about the Kroger. You care a little bit more about the school down the road. You care a little bit more and you raise more hell about the transportation and the infrastructure that's near your place. And so we need to incentivize the best we can the folks that are making this place work and paying our taxes, to pay our teachers and to pay our police officers and so forth and so on. Let them get a little bit of ownership. So that's the focus that I want to have. And then the third thing we'll do is, I think, look at how Louisville spends the money that we gave it. I said Louisville's about 24% of the tax revenues. We don't get nearly that much money back. It's about half of that. But we have, largely to David's hard work and Gerald Neal's hard work, and most importantly, the most important legislator in Louisville, Julie Rocky Adams' hard work, we got more money coming back to Louisville than we ever have, almost $1 billion. $100 million of that went straight to the city for revitalization projects for downtown Louisville. We're putting our money where our mouth is. We want our city to recover. But if we want to do that again in 2026, then the city, Mayor Greenberg, has to develop, has to produce, has to show groundbreaking, has to show that money is actually being used in a good way. So David and I can go to our colleagues and say, thank you for what you've done. Look at what it's done. Let's double down on that. So that's the Louisville issue. I would also say, to get a little bit partisan here, Republicans had a spectacular night in November, not only across the country and across the Commonwealth, but certainly in Louisville, where we took 3 seats in the council. That will make a material difference. We now have more seats in the council than we've ever had, going into the nonpartisan switch. And we also have, we held all of our seats in Louisville. The governor and the Democrats came very hard at a number of our people. We all held them very solidly, and that will have some policy wins for Louisville as well. So want to see what Louisville does with the money we've given it, and so we can use that as the catalyst to get some more money. So thank you for the forum for having this, and let's roll.
All right. Thank you, Jason. Thank you both. All right. Lourdes, Lawrence, whoever. Thank you, Lawrence, for stepping up. Any questions you got?
Jason, you mentioned the income tax reduction, and there's a question about that. What have been the quantifiable benefits of lowering the state income tax, and how has it benefited, in your view, benefited Louisville?
Yeah, so if you reduce the income tax from 6% to 4%, the average Kentucky taxpayer gets $1,200 in her pocket, period. That's enough of an answer. Let me go further. The states that have lower income tax have bigger growth. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to, over time, get to a place where we can tell our businesses expand here, get to a place where we can tell businesses outside Kentucky locate here. The person who's making the decision, one of the things they're deciding is, how much taxes am I going to have to pay? How much taxes is my top brass going to have to pay? We need great parks, we need great arts, we need great sport, we need great location, great transportation, working on all of that. But a major part of the equation is, what am I going to have to pay? What are my top folk going to have to pay in income tax? So we're trying to reduce that. I said over time, but look at what our tax structure is going to be when we're done. It's going to be as good as anywhere else or better. Indiana's leading the way that has an income tax right now. Tennessee has 0 for places that don't have income tax. So we want to get closer to where Indiana is. I think they're about 3.25. We're going to be 3.5, so we're close, but we want to beat them and go down even more. But look at our sales tax. Our sales tax is 6%. Tennessee's is 9%. So we're going to have the best overall tax structure. One thing we've got to do is fix the property taxes. And the way I think we should do that, I'm hoping everybody in Louisville's on board with this. I think from the right and the left are, so far as I know, we need to allow Louisville to diversify its tax structure at the local level. Right now, you can tax income, occupational tax, and you can tax property, but you can't tax sales. And what that means is the working man and working woman is soaked in taxes. So we need to have an opportunity for the tourists to pay some sales taxes. We don't have that right now. So it's a growth situation. What are the metrics? The most important one is the lady who's going to work and she's making an average salary in Kentucky. She's got $1,200 more to spend in her pocket.
I have a follow-up question, but first, Senator Yates, your thoughts on lowering the income tax?
Yeah, I think that right in this room, we got a lot of business owners that you can talk about the need to make sure you have responsible government at all time. And so anytime say, do you want to lower taxes? Well, the political answer is always, of course, we want to lower taxes, right? But at the same time, I want to make sure that we provide for the basic government's necessities that we have. And so we first completely against it, because of the worry that we would offset that with increases in different type of sales tax that otherwise haven't and would be an undue burden. But then we locked in and said, all right, well, we'll put some triggers in place that in the event that we can't afford it, it wouldn't go down. Because I was worried what happens whenever the federal government stops stimulating our economy, we have so much money. So everything worked out. Now we're going to get down to 3.5, but a lot of times because we made the numbers, but if you look really deep into our budget, some of what we did is some bonding and other things to make sure we hit those different levels. So we want to make sure we're being really truthful with ourselves. Now, honestly, I think this can be a good thing, the way it's set right now to 3.5, as long as we do it responsibly. And so our schools are really, really important, right? Our education model, our public safety is really important. So when we're talking about attracting big business and stuff, we can't continue to have a regressive tax to the point that we can't afford the basic necessities that people depend on. So when you're talking about working families and drawing people in, not only you're wanting to bring the corporation, but you got to bring the ready, willing, and able workforce with them. And so it's that balanced approach. So it's easy to walk up and for me to say, yes, absolutely, cut taxes, more money in your pocket, vote for me. It's a lot harder for me to say, all right, I've got to sit down and really line out these numbers to make sure each legislative cycle that I can make sure that we make ends meet. Because somebody's got to be the adult. We've got to be the adults at the table, right? We've got to sit down and say, we've got to make sure that we pay our basic government necessities. We make sure that public safety is so important, infrastructure investment is so important, and we want to make sure that not just Louisville, but Kentucky, we can transformative. So we got to be careful in the way that we don't strap ourselves in the way that we can't move forward and be competitive. Because unlike some of the other tourist areas, and we should invest in more tourism, we don't have some of that extra money coming in. Now, I would rather get money from Danny Wimmer Presents and these tourist events and all these other things than from straight taxes, and we can do better on that. We've seen that through some of the incentives we've done with the film festivals coming in. We've done with just all these incentives to draw people in, and I'm looking at my tourism people going, yeah, that's what we need to do. But I think just if we become non-diversified, if we have a 0% income tax, then I promise you that we're going to have to raise taxes other places, and it'll be a regressive tax. It'll be ways in sales tax that you otherwise weren't taxed before. It'll be things that you haven't seen. So I think it's really important to lay everything out to the people. And I think we did a pretty decent job in the last session in saying, here's what's going to be increased in your taxes, and here's what's going to be reduced.
And that's my follow-up question, Jason. You mentioned Tennessee's 9% sales tax. Do you anticipate Kentucky either having to raise the sales tax or broaden it to other things that are not covered now, like groceries?
No. And I would note we didn't raise any taxes this year. I also want to say I agree with everything that my friend David has said. I also want to say, though, I alluded to it in my opening remarks about controlling spending. Let's talk about what we've done. So for 20 years before we took over, from 1998 to 2017, we did not pay the pensions. We paid pensions and billions on top of that. So much so that we had a bond rating reduction when we took over. It's been increased twice now. The debt ratio is better now in the Commonwealth of Kentucky than it's been. Rainy day fund is up to 45 days. It's actually in the 60 days. We spent it down. That's part of the money that Louisville got. So we have the healthiest rainy day fund in the country. When we took over, it was 0 days. It's now 45 days. What does that mean? It means if government completely shuts down, which it won't, and no dollars go to Frankfurt at all for a full year, which it won't, we can carry on government with the same amount of funding we have right now for 45 days. It's the healthiest rainy day fund in the country. We're doing this all the while reducing your taxes. If you're an architect or a nurse, we used to sweep your funds, not we, the General Assembly before. That hasn't been done since 2016, and it won't be done again. So that money that you pay in your fees licensing fees is your money. We pay cash for maintenance on buildings. We haven't done that before. We've funded our education system more than we ever have, especially when you include pensions in that, which you must because it's a fringe benefit, an earned benefit. So we are doing what needs to be done. We're doing what we've been elected to do, which is reduce taxes, unbridle our workforce and our companies, while all the time being very smart in how we spend our money. So we're doing those things. I agree with what my friend David has said. We've got to be cautious. And that's why we're taking the conservative approach, and we're saying it only goes down when we have $2 for every one that we reduce it.
And just, that sounded a whole lot like our Governor Stump speech as well. So
Which he vetoed these bills.
So part of it is making sure, and because we went down to the legislative conference last week, and so there's so many states in very similar position that we are. We had unprecedented amount of money coming in from the federal government that stimulated our local economy, and I think it was, and Jason's right, we were smart on making sure that a lot of this was one-time spending. So it was more money than we didn't know what to do with. It come in, but now I'm worried because a lot of agencies now got the idea, they got used to it, they've increased this, and we're saying, well, this money's not going to be here in the future. We're not going to have that stimulus into it. So that's the problem we're already coming into because people got dependent on that, agencies got dependent on that, but they're one-time funds that we may not see. So that's my part, and maybe that's the Dave Ramsey financial piece in me, but I know that we got to make sure we got some of that put back because Kentucky is historically not a really wealthy state. We know that, right? We struggle with things. And we have, I mean, we're always in the top 10 of abuse and neglect. We have issues with our education model. There's so many really strong needs that have to be invested in. And my worry is if we don't put that investment now, we're really going to get hurt in 10, 12 years.
Yeah, and we'll go back and forth a little bit here, and I agree with that. So the kind of the things that we did, Dave was talking about House Bill 1, that's the money we spent out of the rainy day fund. Our budget was separate and very good, but separate and balanced. But House Bill 1, which is what he's talking about, those one-time dollars, that's things like water projects that have been overdue in Martin County and other places all over the Commonwealth of Kentucky. That's things like Riverport, that's things like Kentucky, our Muhammad Ali Airport gave $5 million to them. That's things like $30 million to the Home of the Innocents for their building project. Those are one-time dollars, and we've told them straight up, so if they are relying on it, shame on them. We've told them straight up, this is one-time dollars, do not expect it again. Now, hopefully we have enough money that comes in that we can do other one-time dollars, but do not base your budget on this amount. And our budget is not based on those dollars. Those are dollars from the rainy day fund because we had more than 60 days that we could pay, and we think 45 days is very responsible. In fact, it's still the strongest at 45 days in the country. So those dollars are not continuous obligations.
Thank you for those answers. Shifting gears a little bit, there was quite a bit of interest on education in the audience, and I'm putting together 5 different questions here. So Amendment 2.
Brent, how many was from Brent?
Amendment 2 failed, but we're still looking at so many of our schools are falling below proficiency in reading and math, desperately below. And then we have 33,000 kids who are not attending JCPS who are eligible to attend JCPS. So what now, looking at the, both the ugly and the beautiful, what now?
We both got kids that actually go to school together onto it. And so I'm watching this not only as a legislator, but as a father. And I watch the friend groups come over and you worry about the one kid that gets left behind and what happens. I was recently at the Americana and an event there and just talking about how many children that are really, lack of a better definition, homeless, that JCPS is trying to house or at least educate. 120 different languages that we're working with. And yesterday I met with Marty Polio, who is outgoing superintendent, and I'm talking about the next 6 months, what they anticipate on trying to do. And there's a lot of challenges here locally. Now, after the Amendment 2 failed, I think that was pretty clear. We talked about, in the voting, a message sent. Our public schools are really important to this community, and they want to make sure that they're funded. And I think people believe that, and I think our business community believes that, and I think that, in fact, a lot of our legislators believe that. And so we want to make sure we're putting together. Part of, I think that we could do is look at the way the SEEK funding is done. Currently, it is really not fair, and fair is a pretty broad word, but the way it relates to your bigger places like JCPS, where not only are we a wealthy district, but we have a whole lot of people who are very, very poor. And so it messes up the numbers a little bit, how it can be done. We also have some different hurdles that otherwise we didn't have. One thing that I think is really neat that they'll be moving forward is some audio things they'll be putting the teachers. So not only will they have for safety reasons, they could hit the buttons that would call in and through the local JCPS police force and all those things, but the speech or what the teachers are saying, communicating, will go over the speakers. But for children who are other languages, they'll be able to designate their devices so it can be interpreted in real time. So while it's really important to learn English, but sometimes when they're learning science and math and other things, it helps them not have to switch that over. And so I think with technology, we're working to a lot, and we're going to have to address that. But ultimately, I put forth a bill, and I see Chuck back there, and one of the first things when there was a debacle on the first day of school with some of the busing in the program, I called over and I said, what can we do to help? And he said, here's what we need. And so we started working on legislation immediately. It took the whole session to be able to get it done, emergency legislation. Things that, and that was as simple as allowing non-CDL drivers, when you have smaller vehicles like 9 to 10 person passenger vans, to be able to get the kids to and from school so that they don't have to miss school. And out in the rural areas where you may be going 5 or 6, 7 miles across, one area to pick up 2 kids, it made sense. But we're not fast acting on very, very easy ways that we could address this. And we're looking at best practices throughout the country. I think there was a lot of talk early on, and at least in my session, about breaking up JCPS, and because they're too big. And I think through the task force, really quickly, they realized that would actually cost more money and actually would not be very beneficial from kids from going from school to school. What I know, there's an audit. It's a very expensive audit that won't be done until, I think, July of 2026 onto it. So that's a long time to be having that as we're looking for a new superintendent. I see how much trouble we had with our first police chief and everything else during that. So I'm thinking maybe if the task force during that time, maybe they switch over to look at things that we can do better as far as look at the violence or truancies, and do maybe a broader plan as it would look to all of the Kentucky schools. And then maybe in 2026, when you actually have the audit numbers, then we come back and work on that. Otherwise, it's kind of, you don't want it to be a witch hunt at our biggest school district. You want to have accountability. You want to have oversight. I want to have the very best education models we possibly can. But I also want to make sure that we have a superintendent that can come in, hit the ground running, and do well. And I think that everybody in this room has a benefit in making sure that our public school succeeds. And so that has to be the focus. Instead of, a lot of times on the floor, I'll have these sometimes just almost angry, horrific speeches on there. And I'll say, okay, that's fine. We can be angry together. But what are we doing to make it better? Because that's our job. It's easy to gripe and yell and blame. But once we're elected that office, it is our job to improve things. And I believe that everybody, in the legislature, most people want that to happen. And so that takes money. It takes a focus onto it. We talk, and it's also going to take to make sure that we don't hinder. And so that's a balanced approach.
Wow, what a question. And an answer, I agree with most of what David has said, I'll outline the things I disagree with, but it's a massive issue. It's a massive problem. I don't think our citizens know how big of a problem that is. I will say that the most important thing in government, all of Kentucky, is JCPS. 1 in 6.5 kids in Kentucky go to JCPS. There's over 95,000 kids that go there. It's a $2.2 billion budget. We have over $20,000, well over $20,000 a kid that we spend on it. It's a big issue at 165 schools, depending on how you count. There's some schools that are in JCPS that are also state schools for kids in need, that kind of thing. So we got a ton of schools. We have a huge budget, and we have, I think, a superintendent who's overall done relatively well with the leash that he has, with the rope that he has. Our problem is not the superintendent. Our problem is our school board is an absolute clown show. It doesn't take things seriously. We have 592 deadly weapons brought onto property last year, not one expulsion. What we need to do is get a good superintendent and give him or her the reign and give him or her the power to do the job. When Marty Polio has come to the General Assembly and asked for authority to hire and fire principals, we gave it to them. They went crazy about it and sued us. When he came to us and asked us to give the board less authority and give him some more authority, we did it. Then they sued us. But those are smaller issues, what I just talked about there. But this is a massive issue that we have. Our kids can't read. Our African American readership is in the low 20s, read on grade level. Overall, in the school districts is in the mid 30s. These are not acceptable numbers. by any stretch of the imagination, especially for the amount of tax dollars that we spend. There are 21 school districts in the country with 80,000 kids or more in them. We're obviously one of those. We're the second worst in the amount of money that goes to the classroom. That's 10 years ago numbers. Those are part of the 11 years ago numbers. That was Adam Eland's numbers, and we're looking. One of the things that our new auditors is going to do is look at that. Are we getting enough money into the classroom? But this is an extremely important issue. It's easy, as David said, to take shots, and I've done some of that here, and I'll continue to do that as a JCPS father and as a husband who puts his head on the pillow next to a JCPS teacher every night. And when I go to Thanksgiving at my mother and father-in-law's house, I got 2 retired JCPS teachers right there. So I got to behave, but behaving is fighting. Behaving is not saying it's okay. It is not okay in JCPS. It's not. And so we have to do something better. And I'm not willing to give up right-sizing this district. And I don't think the task force has done that either. I don't know if right-sizing the district's the right answer, but I know status quo is the wrong answer. And so if we do split it up or right-size it, it must be done fairly. It must be done economically fairly, which I think is easy. Just have the whole county pay into the pot and distribute the money equitably. That's easy. That's the easy part. But it also must be done fairly racially. That's not so easy because we have, unfortunately, a very stratified city with respect to where people live based on racial background. So we have to make sure that we do that appropriately. The South End is easy. That's diverse enough. The West End and the East End is much more difficult. And actually, the collar of the Watterson is the widest area in Louisville and makes it very difficult, way wider than even the East End. And so it makes it very difficult. But we have to get those things done right. But we can. But this is not. It's not fair to just say that JCPS isn't working well enough for enough kids. It's doing a lot of good for a lot of kids, to be sure. But we also have to understand that we are broken. Too many of our families are broken, and you can't expect a teacher to be able to teach. My wife teaches English as a second language. You can't expect a teacher to be able to succeed like they maybe were able to do when our families were intact, when they're so broken today. And I'm not making that negative. My parents are divorced. I'm not throwing any shots. What I'm saying is we have to take reality and understand that our school district has stresses and pressures that people we can't fathom, we can't understand. So we got to love on everybody, but we have to keep fighting. And we can't just throw bombs and say the left doesn't want any change, so they don't care, or the right wants change, so they hate public schools. That's so silly and so stupid. But we have to have real, frank conversations where we're willing to offend each other to get to the right result. And I'm willing to offend anybody. I think right-sizing JCPS is the right resolution. If I'm wrong, that's fine, but I'm going to reach for more than we can grasp. I'm going to plow some snow so Ken Fleming and his task force can get something really meaningful done. And the biggest thing we have to do is we have to have governance change at JCPS. We can't continue to have 7 board members who control everything in the ways that they've done. They've shown that they're not up to the task. And so we need to learn from the history and fix it. I don't have all the answers, obviously. But we have to go forward with those types of things.
I'm sorry. You touched on one thing I thought was particularly important is that JCPS and certainly not the state legislature is going to be able to fix everything.
No.
I've been a youth mentor, and one thing we do each year is Code a Kid. And it's under, we Chase Gavin, who worked in my legislative office. Some of you knew Chase. He had passed away, but we call it Chase Gavin Code a Kid. And it started off relatively small, but making sure that the children got a new coat of their own, about 300 coats or so. And the demand was so high. We do it in a way that teachers, counselors, and even the police officers in there, they get to discreetly hand those coats to these children and build that relationship. It is so needed. I didn't understand. This is a guy who's been involved in the youth mentor, everything else. How many children that are otherwise have nothing? The kids that would break down and cry and say this is the first thing new they've ever gotten, ever. And now I got people 10 years later who are volunteering for the program, buying coats for other kids. And so what I'll say is that's an example is that a lot of times government's not going to be able to do this. And certainly not school. It's going to take the community and people and volunteering and places like Shirley's Way and all these that had come in. And I'm telling you, that makes a huge difference. Some of the youth mentor groups you work into, that's fine that you can go into it. But when they meet that big brother, big sister, or that mentor, that outdoor, that makes a difference. And one thing that we've looked at best practices. One thing I've seen that really transform areas and stuff is the involvement of the community. Mm-hmm. That's where you have that strong. And that's one thing that I feel like there's been a disconnect. And so the more that we can strive for that and push for that, I think the stronger that we'll have the next generation. But if we have these young people growing up that no one's ever shown them love or compassion, then we cannot expect them to go out in the world with love and compassion. They're going to be problematic and they're going to have issues. And so I know that's outside of my legislative topic and outside of JCPS, but I'm telling you, I believe very much there's a very real impact. And sometimes people just want the opportunity to help. And so whenever I can, I try to find ways to join up with my nonprofits and things and ways to be able to build that. And I think that has a very real impact.
Yeah, and Big Brothers and Big Sisters you brought up has some really good ideas we need to develop more. I want to know that one of the great things I think that Marty Polio has done is he stopped forced busing. Now, forced busing was I'm just going to call it straight. Forced busing was for black kids. It wasn't for white kids. I mean, maybe it was back in the day, but nobody from the East End got bused. It was always kids from the West End that got bused to the East End schools. And they stopped that a couple of years ago and let moms and dads and guardians from the West End make the choice whether they want to send their kid all the way to Crosby or Ballard or whatever. And most of those kids, what I understand from the superintendent's office, most of those parents have decided to stay local. So I want to know, have we had more involvement locally? Because it's very difficult for somebody to be involved if they live in Russell, but their kid goes to Crosby. But maybe if they go closer, so has that been helpful? There's some things we need to know. But it is certainly community involvement. But the fundamental thing is we have to have governmental reform in JCPS. It hasn't worked, it's not working, and we can't let it continue to be the same.
We're fast running out of time. We have so many questions, but there is one more education question I want you to, if you can, as quickly as possible, address. Despite the defeat of Amendment 2, do you anticipate any movement towards funding charter schools since they are considered public schools?
Well, I don't think any of them exist right now. To the extent that they exist, yeah, we'll fund them, and they'll be public schools.
I mean, right now it's defined and it's funded under its constitution only in certain regards. And I think that there's a model in place. I just don't think that I think they had trouble making the numbers work. And again, like I was a youth volunteer at ROTC Bluegrass Challenge, which was kind of that way. You would take kids at risk. They were moved to the campus there, and it was very successful. I think there are certain models that can be successful. I've talked to members at JCPS that said that that maybe we could do it at risk or vocation and things like that. But it has to have the same type of standards and protections that we have in place at our public schools.
What are our legislative intent toward AI and data security?
We had an AI task force that issued their report. John Hodgson is kind of our leader in the House on that, representative from East Jefferson County. I think we're kind of at the beginning stages on what that exactly means. I think most of that will be driven by the federal government. Right now, it's just we've asked the agencies to come up with a plan, but it's at the very beginning stages.
I was going to have my phone give you a response. Yeah, I mean, I think part of it has been more, we've learned, I know just enough to know I don't know enough. And I think that it's going to have to be something that the federal government's going to have to lead on this. I mean, just the way it crosses over. And in fact, it's kind of cool when you look at the world summits, how they're discussing and things. So, I mean, definitely the technology is going to have a balance where we have our privacy interests protected. And I think that's where we're going to, at local government anyway, that's where we're going to come in, is making sure that whatever safety reasons we can put on privacy.
This question is directed towards Senator Yates. Last session, you filed a bill that would provide exemptions to the current abortion ban. Do you plan to file this again, and do you think it'll get a hearing?
Yes. And in fact, I think a lot of times after session and some of the politics kind of the presidential stuff is over, and unfortunately you start getting the calls where it's not a political, it's not a piece of paper you're filing, it's real people. And you start, we got a call for a little girl that was in a foster family that was raped, and they not know what to do. And it becomes very emotional. It becomes real. When people come in your office and they tell you that's what they've been through. Me and my wife, we have gone through IVF, and so we had some problems with that. So this is beyond politics. We're dealing with people's lives. And I think that the majority of people who understand it believe that there should be exemptions in place. In fact, I think that the majority of the legislators that I've talked to, maybe the majority, close, believe that there should be exemptions in place. And so at this point, all I've asked is that I want an open, honest discussion in committee. I'm never going to tell somebody how they should vote, but I do believe that through open, honest discussion and debate is where we find truth. And I think it's really important that it be allowed a committee hearing so we can discuss it. And I think that through a committee hearing, it's likely to pass. This isn't a Democrat or Republican thing. This is about Kentuckians.
The Courier-Journal has had a series of articles on sexual predators in our schools. Last year, the General Assembly came close to passing a bill to close a loophole on that situation. What are the prospects of that bill for this year?
Yeah, we've passed things like that in the past. I don't know the particular bill that we're referring to. I can imagine there'd be any opposition to a appropriately drafted bill that would disallow a sexual abuser to be transferred or whatever. Obviously, we need to make sure that the particular teacher or staff member has an opportunity to defend themselves and make sure that it's a legitimate claim. But so insofar as it is, they shouldn't be in their school system. I don't know if anybody would disagree with that.
Yeah, there was a House bill similar to with some of the police officers that we had passed before that where they couldn't move from agency to agency. Made absolute sense. I think that they said they had run out of time or something to that effect. I was Assistant Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. I was on Megan's law team. I prosecuted sex offenders. I've written legislation in regard to the registration. I'm an attorney that has an injury practice, but some of that I also represent victims. Including those that have been sexually abused in the schools. We have a tort system that is supposed to hold accountable, but a lot of those, it's said confidentially, although they're put in place. But we are short police officers, really bad. We merged 2 different units at LMPD, and our sex crime detectives, they're short. And the men and women over there are working their tail off. But I can tell you there was a case where a young girl had been raped, and I know that sounds morbid, but it took almost a month to get an investigation going because people had to go on leave and do all these other things, and there wasn't people to investigate. We've got to be able. We talk about resources that are important. These resources are important, making sure that we have incentives to hire our detectives, making sure that we can afford to be competitive, because a lot of times if you get a few years into LMPD, they'll snatch you up at other places. And so nothing's in a vacuum. So yes, I think additional legislation, we expanded the statute of limitations of filing civil actions. All those are important because of sometimes delayed disclosure. And so I'll be supportive as well if it gets back over to us from the House. But ultimately, the legislative action in and of itself is not enough. We've got to make sure that we are funding these things. And that's what I said. It's easy for me to say, I just want to cut all the taxes, but there's so many things that we have to pay for that are so important to our community.
And it's not only important to make sure we pay for the investigator to protect the children, which is certainly the primary thing, but there's a lot of false allegations made, and it destroys a teacher's life when this kind of false allegation has been made. So a quick investigation to exonerate the teachers is good as well. I know a number of teachers who've been misaccused and or exaggerated, and it takes a long time for them to recover. I remember there was an official from one of the previous presidential cabinets, and he was accused of something and tried, and he was acquitted, and then he said, now where do I go get my reputation back? So primarily it's to protect the kids, no doubt about it. There's not a close second. But it's also to make sure that when you do have an accusation that is made that is unfounded or exaggerated, that the appropriate response is made.
This is directed toward Representative Nemes. Do you think there'll be legislation to tackle some of the issues we see in the foster care system?
Yeah, so this is another massive issue, very complex issue, and dealing with people's lives that are difficult, emotional, and so we've done a lot of this since maybe they did things before I was elected. I'm sure they did. I was elected in 2016. David Mead, who's our Speaker Pro Tem, adopted a child through foster system and has led an effort to improve our foster care system. We've done a number of things for foster kids. I don't think we'll ever get it right, and we'll never get it done. And we shouldn't get it done. We should always strive to improve it. So I don't know of any particulars that are being worked on right now. That's not my space, but I know Speaker Pro Tem David Mead is working on these issues as he constantly is. So if there's anything in particular, whoever asked that question, please come up to me afterward and make sure I know what's on your mind.
There was some work too also where it's Ken taking over the foster. There were some issues there that if I take on my brother's children or my
Yeah.
kid's children, it's still a pretty heavy financial, and so some incentives and things that help with funding and making sure. So working out, just looking at best practices, I think that's the key. Is sometimes we're 15 years behind and we get to learn from other people's trials and failures and successes, and so that's implementing some of that.
Is there any legislative obstacles to implementing a pilot program for traffic cameras to control speeding and running red lights?
I filed a bill, and so it's limited the way our Kentucky Constitution set in place. And so everybody will agree we don't have enough police officers, we don't have enough troopers, we don't have enough law enforcement, and then everybody else believes that when reckless driving and excessive speed kills people, and we all have loved ones that are on the roadway, and unfortunately in my private practice, I'll represent a death case just about every year, usually because of distracted or just reckless driving. And so it would be silly for any of us to say, no, we don't want that enforced, because we think that yes, in a safe environment we do. It has to be done with proper oversight and under what I wanted to do, and I think would have been the bill that I filed was in work zones, because we're seeing our men and women are out there putting themselves in danger, and it's hard to keep them employed and very dangerous. We would put those in work zones that if you're reckless driving in a work zone, excessive speed, and so it's caught on the camera, and there has to be an individual there, because that's the way the Constitution is set up, to be able to testify that you've done all those things, that you would be able to be cited. And the idea is this is not going to be some excessive penalty, but hopefully that picture, that citation, receiving that in the mail, even if it's a warning the first time, slows people down, and we don't have to continue doing moments of silence in my transportation committee because we've lost other workers.
Yeah, Representative John Blanton from McGoffin County had a bill similar to that, where it was a work zone, and the vote is close, but we don't have the votes right now. I would say I could support something, putting camera where there's a demonstrable need, when there's a demonstrated problem in past, but I will never support cameras willy-nilly here, there, and everywhere. I don't care how many police were down. We do not live in a police state. I won't support a police state. No way will we have, for my vote, will we have public cameras all over the place without a demonstrated need for that particular area. I don't want somebody at LMPD, as much as I love them and respect them, I don't want somebody at LMPD or else somewhere else having access to figure out where you've been at all times. That's not the America I want to live in, so I'll fight with everything I got to put cameras all over the place, because that's not the America I want to live in. If we want to do it for demonstrated need, where there's this stop sign is always disregarded and people are getting hurt, that's a different situation. But cameras here, there, and everywhere, no way.
A couple of prison reform questions. One related to perhaps a First Step Act similar to the federal law that's reduced federal incarceration by 20%, and also wondering about a clean slate initiative to help some of those who've served their sentences.
Yeah, David and I both agree with those kinds of things. Where you get out, you serve your time, you should be able to have a clean slate, which means that it shouldn't be on your record. You should be able to vote. You should be able to do all the things that you could do if you haven't had a record. Emily Calloway, a representative from Fairdale, South Louisville, has put a second chance bill together that passed the House and got really close to getting through the Senate this past year. Hopefully we'll be able to do that with David's support. I know he supports it. And so we're moving forward on those types of things. When people are exonerated, and I have a bill that when you've been able to prove that you've served time that for crimes that you didn't commit, there's a number of states that have this, then the government should pay for, I got $65,000 a year that you were in prison. That's a little different because you've been proven that you're not guilty. But if you've served your time, you should be brought back into the community, not only for the dignity of yourself and for your family, but also that's the best thing for our community. We want you to I talked about earlier the importance of ownership. We want you to feel ownership in the elections and in your community. And when you feel that, you're more likely to behave in the ways that we want everybody to behave.
We've gone to some of the Criminal Justice Commission stuff at the same time, different places, look at best practices, and just simply having the voting rights back, voting reduces recidivism because you feel you're part of the community. But not just saying, hey, they let you out and here you go, but the best communities that have low recidivism rates have programs in place to help you get right into either training or job things. And so a lot of people say, oh, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to reward somebody who's been in trouble. Well, the idea is making sure you're doing an investment in your community. Because if you put somebody out on the street and release them and they have nothing else to do, and the only thing they've ever known before was crime, there's a high likelihood they go to crime. So it's easier to do during incarceration, it should also be a rehabilitation so that you're learning new skill sets and things that you can be part of the community, and it reduces that recidivism and saves everybody money as well.
I know one of the things that that our friends at ACLU are working on this year, and some other groups are working on, which I fully support, is a situation where if you've been convicted and you're going to sentencing, that your family status, if you have children, you're the primary breadwinner or caregiver of kids, then that's put into the question before the judge as to what the proper response should be. And so, I represent Jefferson, Oldham, and Shelby counties, and the only women's prison in the state is in my district. And when I talk to some of those women, they have stories that are very emotional, and so they need to be held accountable for the crimes they've committed, no doubt about that. But we also have future generations that we need to also think about. And sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes that should include their parents, even though their parents have committed a crime.
Sure, those are numbers that we have to pay attention to. So we're one of the highest states in our region for incarceration. And when we look at the numbers and cost of actually incarcerating the prisoner, but we don't look when you take away a caregiver, what the cost of it is, what costs the next generation, and all of it has to be implemented when you're doing the balancing, right? So saying, well, I can't afford to do the rehabilitation when we're in prison. Well, can we afford not to because of the cost? And so I think we talk about we're not going to continue to do the same thing over and over again. Well, we have to talk about that with our massive incarceration rates too in Kentucky. I don't want to strap that burden to my child in that generation where they're paying those massive rates. And I think a lot of it comes to preventative. It comes to health care early on in education, mental health care, making sure that we do models, we're getting the children where they need it, and not cutting the funding where kids that have already fallen from between the crack. And so these are long 10, 12-year plans. And as politicians, we a lot of times run in 2 and 4 year cycles. So you don't see that a whole lot. But if our community wants to be transformative, we're going to have to do that.
We're agreeing on a lot, David. Let's try not to this next time.
All right, give
Whatever
us
the next
something.
question is, let's make it interesting.
And Lourdes, let me just say real quick, we only have a couple of minutes left for our speakers here. So if you've got one, please yeah, we have time for one more. Thanks.
Do you or any of the legislators, any of your colleagues, have any plans for health policy this session?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think there's health policy questions every session. I don't know of any particular ones that Representative Mosier, she's our chairperson of the Health Committee, that she's working on first and foremost. But we brought up abortion earlier. That's, I'm talking with the OBGYNs about, they tell me that they believe that they're frozen and they don't know what to do in certain circumstances where the woman is presenting with the danger to her life, maybe not imminent. But they think they should be able to act, and they're worried if they have the authority. So clarifying the lines and what they can do is important because we want to protect the mother and we want to also protect the child. They're two human beings in that situation every time. But clarifying those types of things are the right thing to do, I think.
The omnibus bill that we passed, everybody was happy except for me. Everybody they were looking at me. I was like, we didn't fund it. It wasn't fully funded. So you can cheer, but part of it is saying we pass legislation a lot of times, but we don't provide the money for the legislation. So that's me. We need to talk. Of course, we'll have to open back in the budget, but you can move things around a little bit. But I think making sure that not only do we have the legislation, but we're making sure that some of the maternal rates, the mortality for that goes down. In the areas. Obviously, we're going to continue to work because of these health deserts that we have, and we got to work on that. I was really proud of some of the work that we got at St. Mary's Elizabeth and the Burden Center there. And so there'll be a multitude of things. Obviously, health is a really, really important topic with the legislature, but it's also very expensive. So remember, in administrative regs, there was a big ordeal where the governor tried to expand benefits for vision and hearing, and then they came back and said that he was out of step. He wasn't allowed to do that. He overextended. That it was up to the legislature to expand it, but then we didn't. And so I think that there are problems like that because we know that basic things like vision and hearing and dental gets people back in the workforce. It makes sure it's a quality of life thing, but without proper dental care, there's other health issues related, and everything goes into place, and it's short-sighted not to fund those things because they're going to show up later on with really, really bad sickness and health conditions, and I think Kentucky can get on board and expand that services to people because ultimately I do believe that health care should be a very basic human right, and if we have the ability to do that, especially when it comes to children, we got to make sure that we're expanding that.
Yeah, David brought up Mary Elizabeth Hospital, but I also want to note that there's Norton Hospital that's opening in the West End Hospital. That's pretty damn awesome, which is great and overdue. I should have also mentioned, I've got a birthing center bill that I've had for the last few years that it's going to pass this year. We're really close. We almost got it done last year. Really almost got it done. I thought I was going to get it done on the last day, but we're going to get that thing passed this year. But I do need to say with respect to Medicaid, obviously people who need it, it has to be there for them. That's what it was designed for. We support that. But we have 14 counties that have over 60% of their population enrolled, not qualified for, enrolled in Medicaid. Another 44 counties, so that's almost half of our counties. We have 120 counties. I just outlined 58 right there. Another 44 counties that have over 40% of their population enrolled in Medicaid. You can't sustain that. Our budget is out of control, and in three areas. And one of the major areas, the major area, is Medicaid. And so while we want to make sure that we provide it to our folks, no doubt about that, provide healthcare to our folks, you can't sustain that. You can't have 58 of our 120 counties where 40% or more of your population is on Medicaid. It just won't work. So we have to figure something out. And the expansion that we've had pre-COVID, we're the worst, some say the best state, I say the worst state on getting it back to pre-COVID levels. We just can't sustain the numbers, and we're not going to. So we're going to be wrangling the monster of Medicaid.
And other states are struggling with that. Our healthcare system is broken. We know that, and we can't afford not to have coverage either. Because of the long-term effects that has for Kentuckians. And then you don't want people showing up at the emergency room when they're sick either, because the cost that has onto us. So that's, again, we have to figure out what the cost of not having health care for Kentuckians.
All right, thank you, guys. Everyone, thank our speakers for being here today. Thank you all, and thank you for Lourdes and Lawrence, and thank you all for a great 2024. We hope to see you here in January. The next date we got January 8th, Wednesday. Hope you have a good holiday and see you next year. Thank you.
Thank you all for having me.